Hi, welcome to the Professional Development webinar series. Today I'm going to be talking about effective instruction in multi-level classes. My name is Justine Light. I work in Link RDP. I am the Professional Development Facilitator for that program. Before I start, I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements. My work in this area of multi-level classes has been going on for a few years and was initially guided by Dr. Marion Rossiter at the University of Alberta in the TESOL program. And then I was lucky enough to work with Toronto Catholic District School Board, Sharon Ajabi and Anne-Marie Caskins on a project that they did where I was also able to contribute a considerable amount of work on multi-level classes. So I just want to acknowledge and thank both of those parties for the help they've given me in me gaining my own understanding and deeper knowledge about this topic. Really, I want to start today by thinking about what varies within a multi-level class, because I don't think that every class that's called multi-level is the only setting where we encounter these challenges. For example, I've had a Link 4 class that had a very wide range of proficiency levels and backgrounds of students. So even though that wasn't officially acknowledged as multi-level, it really was multi-level. And the reason that the elements rather that go together to make up a multi-level classroom can vary. Of course, we always think of language proficiency level, and that is the most challenging to work with. But this can be exacerbated or improved upon if you have students with a different experience with education or a very similar experience with education. There are also factors such as cultural expectations for the classroom, what the students expect their role to be, what they expect your role to be. And then finally, I listed here a couple of other differences, individual differences, such as the age of your learners or their motivation levels, their goals. So many factors go into making a multi-level class that almost every class is multi-level. Of course, in Link RDP, we have smaller numbers of learners in each site, and so it's not uncommon for our facilitators to have to face a situation where they have learners from CLB1 to CLB6 in the same classroom at the same time. We try and avoid that where we can, but it's not always possible. But as you know, working just with a Link 4-5 class could in fact give you a vast variety of differences between your learners and almost make that a multi-level setting. I want to first think about the advantages and the upside of multi-level classes. Yes, there can be upsides. We're very quick and happy to talk about the downsides, but there are upsides to this setting too. I just want to give you a moment to think about what some of those upsides might be, and then I'll share my experience with that. I think in the multi-level setting, with the right fronting by the instructor, the students don't have to be concerned and upset and worried about some perceived disadvantages. For example, for lower level students, they get to see the achievements of higher level students within their program. They also can see a situation where they get more than one model of English. So for example, a CLB2 learner who's in a class where there are CLB5 students not only has the input of the teacher, but also of the other students. Students learn to cooperate and work together, and they can give each other feedback. As teachers, we become very skilled at understanding students when they speak, but a lower level learner may have to ask a higher level learner for more clarification, thereby forcing the higher level learner to be more accurate and focused on what the message they're trying to communicate. So through cooperation, there can be great advantages for the learners in a multi-level classroom: greater exposure, greater challenges, greater need for clarity and communication. There are some disadvantages though, and I'm not going to just pretend that there are none. I think the disadvantages sometimes fall more onto the teacher. It's harder to plan. It takes longer to plan. It's harder to know if the activities that you're delivering are actually meeting the needs of everyone, or are you just delivering always to the middle? And sometimes students can become disenchanted with a multi-level class. They may feel confused by what's going on, or they may feel held back by the situation in the classroom. So what is the instructor's role in a multi-level classroom? Because we can't do everything, we can't fix every problem, When we look at our general role, our job is to respond to all students, to give all of our students feedback on their language development, to provide a situation that's motivating to all students, and give them an opportunity to interact with each other. And so we can do this in a multi-level classroom in the same way that we do it in a classroom that has less range, by being inclusive, grouping our students flexibly, and planning for success, looking at ways for the students to show us to demonstrate how their language has improved. So one of the techniques I'm going to be talking about first today is differentiated instruction. So here what we're doing is we're varying the difficulty of tasks for the language learner in a variety of ways. There are three that I'm going to talk about: linguistic complexity, cognitive complexity, and communicative stress, so that we can have very similar or the same task for our whole group, but ask learners at different levels to achieve different things, or to give them higher levels of support within completion of the task. I'm not going to suggest to you that in a multi-level class you're going to have 8 levels and therefore you're going to have 8 different tasks with 8 different outcomes and 8 different focus. It's going to be too challenging for you in terms of prep. So what I'm looking for is, how can we all be working on approximately the same text or the same task, but by varying the amount of support and what is required to complete the activity, we can meet the needs of a wide range of learners. It sounds kind of confusing the way I'm saying it, so let's go to an example. It's much more straightforward. So let's look at linguistic complexity. So here we're focusing on the difficulty of language used to explain the task, or complete the task, or support the task. So here's an example task that you might be focusing on, let's say a unit on health. Health is an important settlement topic across LINC levels or CLB levels within a LINC program. And so a very typical task that might fit into your unit of planning is learners completing a medical form. Now, for your lower level learners, that could be completing a form that asks simply for your name, address, phone number, and emergency contact. What you could add on to that request for those pieces of basic information is previous medical history. That's a lot harder to find the language, both technical and grammatical, to describe. And I would estimate that students working at a higher CLB level would take about the same amount of time to complete the personal information plus the medical history as your lower level learners would take to just complete the personal information. So we're all working on a medical form. We're all working on the same theme. There wasn't a tremendous amount of prep, but there's an extra piece added on for the higher level learners. What about cognitive complexity? So here instructors can work with the familiarity of the task or the cognitive processing demands of the task. For example, you might want your learners to role play a discussion with a nurse, you playing the role of the nurse, about an illness. At a lower level of language proficiency, learners might list what they've eaten in the last 24 hours. However, higher level learners might have to describe the symptoms of a food allergy. So the level of basic knowledge required to do the first activity here is much lower than that required to do the second. It's a much more familiar task and it requires cognitively less of the learners. That leaves them able to focus on the language needed to complete the task. Symptoms of a food allergy is much more difficult. The students might have to read about it first, go and do some research, talk about things that they're not personally familiar with, or maybe they are. But it ramps up the difficulty of the task and requires more of those learners. How about communicative stress? Learners can adapt time limits, pressure, type of responses required, the number of participants. The more people you work with in the group, the harder it is to get something done. Here's an example task, identifying the dangers of the internet for children. Lower level, preps based on a reading. The lower level learners will complete a table on the dangers of the internet. They're guided, they're taking down information based on the guidance given in the table for what they need to record. Based on a similar reading, then your higher level learners could actually present and do a mini presentation on the dangers of the internet for children. And that again could be a reinforcement or learning for the lower level learners. So we're all talking about the internet, we're all talking about parenting, and we're doing similar or the same reading, but what we do with that reading is very different based on our language ability. So again, I'm trying to make it so it's quick and easy to prep for, but meets the needs of the learner. Here's some other types of tasks. So these two are called biased tasks, where you require a varying level of learner response, or tiered tasks, where you give a certain amount of support to the learner's responses. Again, it's kind of abstract. Let's get into some examples. Question combinations. In task A, learners with lower proficiency just answer questions. For task B, learners with higher proficiency formulate questions for those answers. The tasks are complementary. When they're finished, you can pair up learners A and B, and they have immediate peer feedback on what the correct question or the correct answer was. Let's look at an example. I'm not going to pause for very long on this. You can download the PowerPoint and read it. It's a story from Learning English with CBC about a man and a dog. Here are the questions. So for task A, the lower level learners would simply get the questions and have to answer very simple, straightforward questions. The higher level learners would get the answer and have to formulate the question, a much more challenging task. Another example of a biased task where you take the same text and you can have learners at two completely different levels working with it. Here is another short text. You can do this as a reading or a listening from Learning English with CBC about the word selfie. And what we're doing here is for version A, it's a close. That means we remove certain words and ask the learners to put together those words, put them in the right place. We may or may not provide the list of words for them depending on the difficulty. For the lower level learners, take away the nouns. These words are well emphasized in speech, they're easy to hear, and they're the core of the main idea. For the higher level learners, take away the auxiliary verbs. So here the participle forms that give you the nuanced meaning. Was taken, has been given. These are hard to hear, they're not emphasized, but they give information such as the perfect aspect or the passive voice that can be important for higher level learners to begin to understand the salience of those forms. So how about CLBs? Do they help in a multi-level class? Absolutely. CLBs are ideally suited to the multi-level class setting. Just look at this example below of the comprehending information descriptors for listening. CLB3, CLB4, CLB5. They're very, very similar. And so you can be meeting the objectives of your curriculum, supporting your learners, creating tasks that they can use in their portfolio in a multi-level setting, using the same audio with different amounts of support or different tasks required for the learners to complete. So that's the end of my tips and ideas for thinking about multi-level classes. I invite you to post your questions and comments to the discussion board, as well as any teaching ideas that you have for teaching with a multi-level class. I really appreciate you watching the webinar. Don't forget, any questions, we're here and waiting.